All right, guys, we are here with Judy Greenspan. Uh, Now, I was introduced to you as a Bay Area community organizer and a member of the Workers' World Party. Is that correct?
Well, Bay Area community organizer. I'm an organizer of the Bay Area of the Workers' World Party Bay Area branch. I am a public school teacher. I'm a member of the Oakland Education Association and the California Teachers Association. Um, I would say more of a political organizer rather than a community organizer, but that's neither here nor there. Doesn't matter.
All right, so jumping right into it. Uh, First question we've got here. Are you pro or anti-voter suppression?
You mean currently now in this country?
Yes.
That's what you mean by voter suppression. Um, well, obviously, we are opposed to voter suppression. In fact, we don't think that the discussion is really large enough, because as long as immigrants, migrants, undocumented people can't vote, as long as prisoners, people who are incarcerated in jails and detention centers and prisons with felony convictions can't vote, there is voter suppression. There has been a history of voter suppression. There's been a history of intimidation against Black people in the South, historically, around voting ever since the Civil War, ever since they won the right to vote and Reconstruction was crushed. So we are opposed. We are for the right of the working class to vote. We're have concerns about about the choices that they have under this current system in terms of who to vote for. But we are certainly not for any voter suppression. Again, like I said, we want, if we're really talking about quote unquote democracy, then everyone should have the right to vote.
All right, and before this, talk to you very briefly. What is your party doing in regards to voter suppression?
Well, we're working. We're a national party, and we have chapters around the country, and we are doing various different things. Here in the Bay Area, we are working to support some of the labor stoppages and some of the labor actions that are being planned for the day after the election. We're also around the country organizing in various united fronts. In Philadelphia, there is a united front that has recently formed for election defense, and some of the people in Philly are actually planning to be at the polls, which is becoming, with the rebellion right now that's taking place in Philadelphia as a response to the police assassination of a young Black man with mental challenges. There's a lot of reason that, and Trump saying, oh yeah, we're going to have poll watchers. There's a lot to be said for the fact that the working class is going to also have to have poll watchers to make sure that their poll watchers, Trump's poll watchers, aren't either the National Guard or the police or other forces that will intimidate people in the polls. In New York City, we just recently had a workers' assembly against racism, which was quite successful. And people are organizing for a major coalition effort on November 7th after the elections. And then there are various other actions that we are supporting around the country. Hi, are you there?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to hit the unmute on my mic.
Okay.
Next question we have here. Would you rather have a fox or a wolf in the White House?
Well, honestly, I'd rather not have a White House. I mean, the White House, with all of the statues that are coming down, I think it's fairly common knowledge that the White House was built by enslaved Africans. It was unpaid slave labor that built the White House. And so the White House needs to be torn down. Or perhaps as Dick Gregory once said, maybe when he was running for president, he said, the first thing I'm going to do is paint the White House black. I thought that was a great idea. Although these days we may want to just tear it down. But in 1964, Malcolm X gave several speeches, and he at that time it was I believe Lyndon Johnson was running for president, and was it George Wallace? I think it was George Wallace, but I'm not sure if it was George Wallace or not. But the Republicans were running someone who was, more openly conservative. And Malcolm X, when he was asked, well, who do you prefer, or what's the deal? He likened the Democrats or the Democratic campaign or the white liberal campaign to that of the fox. And he likened the Republicans, who were out and out racist, vitriolic racists, to the wolf. And he said, a fox is very tricky. And a fox is more likely to be able to kill the sheep, because the sheep, the fox will come in and be really friendly and say, we're here to help you. And then before you know it, he said, you're a lamb chop on a plate. And he said, but the wolf, because the wolf comes in blasting, comes in and lets you know exactly how they feel. That being said, however, we don't really want either the wolf or the fox in the White House. We want a new government. We want an end to capitalism. We want an end to the oppression, the vicious racism, the genocidal treatment of black and brown people in this country. We want an end to the massive unemployment that is, I think we've just seen the tip of the iceberg. We're talking about 40 million people being unemployed. It's going to be worse. The jobs are not going to come back. Neither party is able to really dig itself out of COVID capitalist crisis, which is what we're in, as well as all the massive evictions that are already beginning to happen, and many more are sure to come. Neither one of them is talking about a solution to that. They couldn't even do a little simple bailout measure before the elections. What can they possibly do after the elections? So I would have to say, that Malcolm was saying, well, the wolf is definitely, we've had already, 4 years of the wolf, and we don't want either one of them.
All right. So before we get into more questions here, could you say more about your organization? I know this is always a challenge, but for people that are completely unfamiliar, how would you describe your organization and its goals in a nutshell?
Okay. Well, first of all, we're a little more than an organization. We are a Marxist-Leninist party, which means that we follow the writings and the beliefs of Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin. But more importantly, I think what the party does is when Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto, he ended it with "Workers of the world unite." And we certainly believe in workers of the world uniting. And by workers, I'll explain to you in a second what we mean. We don't just mean like people who are in unions. And we don't necessarily mean just people who have jobs. But Lenin came along and said, wait a minute, that formulation is not broad enough. And it doesn't talk about the special oppression of all of the nations in this world who have been oppressed by imperialism. And so he added, workers and oppressed of the world unite. And one of the things I think that distinguishes Workers' World Party is that we are staunch fighters for the right of oppressed people for their self-determination. And so internationally, what that means is that we support the right of the Palestinians for to reclaim their country from the river to the sea. We support the right of the Venezuelans to fight off U.S. Regime change attempts. We support the right of Cuba. We support the right of the Syrian government to determine, and the Syrian people to determine their own future, as opposed to letting the U.S. intervene and pay CIA-paid thugs to destroy and disrupt. within this country, we support the right of the Black community to decide their fate. We support the right of the Latinx communities, of the indigenous communities, of people of color to fight back against centuries of colonialism, racism, and genocide. And so that defense, that what we call the defense of oppressed people to their self-determination, is a very, very important part of what Workers' World Party believes. We came out of, we were probably, as far as I know, we were the first organization to organize a demonstration against the war in Vietnam, for which Ho Chi Minh actually sent us a letter saying, thank you so much for supporting us. So back in the 60s, I think it was 64, 63, 64, something like that, when the war itself was not even on the radar of the left or the working class. I mean, eventually it became a mass movement, which coincided with the Vietnamese victory against the US. But we were also one of the first actually organized. We sort of recharged and revitalized International Women's Day in this country in 1970, when Workers' World Party, through its youth group, Youth Against War and Fascism, organized a march to the Women's House of Detention for International Women's Day. And that was, again, one of the first International Women's Day demonstrations in many, many years. The holiday dating back to, like, you know, I think it was 1912 to women workers fighting for their lives. So Workers' World Party is also not afraid to sort of take stances that are against the flow, shall we say, or maybe or against what might be the majority trend in the movement, as well as perhaps in the working class. And that we have always, there was and this sort of gets back to self-determination, but in the 1960s, and this goes back quite a ways, I'm sorry for all your young viewers who are going, "Ooh, this is ancient history." But in the 1960s, there was a debate on the left in terms of supporting, in terms of how to best oppose the Vietnam War. And some of the liberals, the foxes, as you may, came up with they said, "Oh, we have to call for negotiations now. We must." And when you call for negotiations, you're not just saying to the US you have to negotiate, you're also putting pressure on the Vietnamese. And we believed that it was a struggle for liberation. It was a national liberation struggle, that the Vietnamese people had the right to determine how they wanted to run their own country. And the US had absolutely no role in it whatsoever. And we opposed that. And we went to a national demonstration and with signs chanting, you know, "Dare to struggle, ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh, dare to struggle, dare to win." So we've always been on the left, pushing. And at the same time, we've been involved in labor struggles. We've been involved in union organizing struggles. We've been involved in rank and file struggles. We also were, perhaps, I think, the first party on the left to embrace the LGBTQ plus movement. In fact, that was the issue that drew me to Workers' World Party, along with some other issues in the mid-70s, when it was actually still being debated in the left as to whether or not being gay was somehow a remnant of decadence from capitalism, as opposed to being not just a lifestyle but a political statement against a very, very heterosexist, patriarchal, racist system. So Workers' World Party developed some of the early documents which tied historically the LGBTQ movement to the pre-capitalist societies, the communist societies, which is where, you know, going back to in the history, where a lot of historians since then, a lot of LGBTQ historians have cornered that history. But it was actually debate in the 70s, and Workers' World Party's staunch defense. We were perhaps one of the first parties to attend the Stonewall protests, the pride protests, pushing them always to the left. And we've been very active in the Reclaim Pride movement, the movement to take pride away from the police and the corporations and big business and put it back in the hands of working and oppressed people.
All right. So how do you balance the competing concerns between unity and purity? Purity being, having the right position. To what extent are you willing to uh, compromise in order to have unity among, I guess, workers of the world?
Well, let me say there are some issues that we will not compromise on. We will not compromise on fighting racism and fighting imperialism. Nuances are certainly things. I mean, right now we're one of the groups that are calling for the left to sit down and try to figure out a way that we can unite during this time, certainly against the possibility next week of right-wing militias reacting and responding and attacking people who are trying to vote, or the next day, or in the event that Trump decides he's not going to step down, or says I'm not going to obey the dictates of the election, that there is a real need for the left and for progressive labor organizations to come together. So, for example, United Electrical Workers has put out a call for groups to unite around the issue of racism and to organize work stoppages to protest the political assassinations of people like George Floyd and other people, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, and all the other young Black and brown people who have been killed by the police over the past however long, very long time. So we're supporting that effort. We're supporting a lot of the unity efforts, but we could not. It would be very difficult. There are some issues that would be very, very difficult for us to join in on. However, we think that if groups on the left could even put aside some of their differences, because Workers' World Party has never claimed to have all the answers. That's one of the things that I've always loved. And we've also never claimed that we haven't made mistakes. So I feel like if all the groups felt that way and felt like we could actually sit down and get together, that there would be perhaps more unity and more strength. Because we're very tiny. I always say, I look at the capitalists and the imperialists and look at the Fortune 500. They all get along pretty well. I mean, they pretend to dislike each other and they might fight in the stock rooms or something like that. But there's a lot of unity among the 1%, among the billionaire class. And there's far less unity for the 99%. We believe that we are, that the working class in this country and around the world, we are a majority. We are very strong. If we were united, if we understood, if we could united in terms of realizing that we could move forward, that we would be seeing a lot more victories. And we have also every reason to believe that this unity will be very important for the way that we act over the next couple of weeks.
All right. So the next question comes from Lil Bill. He asks, who do you support in the presidential election, if anyone at all?
We do not support any of the major candidates. Here in California, we have historically been involved in the Peace and Freedom Party. So, we don't tell our members who to vote for, but our position is that no matter who's elected, whether it's Biden or Trump, the system is still winning, and that we have to keep it in the streets. If you go to www.workers.org, you can see a lot of our articles about the elections in which we have sort of exposed the crimes of both the Democrats and the Republicans vis-a-vis the working class. But we are not advocating that people vote for either party.
All right. Next question, also from Little Bill. Do you support the Socialist Rifle Association?
I don't know what the Socialist Rifle Association is. We support the right of oppressed people to defend themselves. Okay, so there have been some instances in, I think it was it Georgia? You know, there have been all of these right-wing militias, and they are white mostly, white right-wing militias, whether they be in Michigan or Wisconsin or Walnut Creek, California, or upstate New York. And white people feel like they can just parade around with rifles. Nothing ever happens to them. And, you know, and there are so many open carry states. But when black people or brown people take up guns, there is always state repression. So there's a group, and I think it's in Georgia, of a black organization that has been taken up, that has put out some social media and videos about carrying rifles, and we have absolutely no problem with that. We're not like, we don't say, you know, that we're against guns. We're against the people who have the guns right now, which the majority is the government, the police, the right-wing militias. They should not have any, they have no right in our eyes to have guns.
All right. I thought for a second you said they're white wing militias.
Right-wing. Yep, but they are white right-wing militias.
Our next question comes from Dick. He asks, what argument would you make in opposition to supply and demand?
What argument would I make in what?
In opposition to supply and demand. I think he's assuming here that you don't believe the economy should be run as a market economy.
Oh, absolutely not. Right. Supply and demand. Oh, well, I'll tell you right now, capitalism at a dead end, they don't operate very well with supply and demand. There's usually an oversupply, and because of the economic crisis, there is an under demand, and that's part of the reason why the capitalist system is in such crisis right now. And it really doesn't have anyone that they can unload their material on. They have an oversupply at this point. But we're socialists. We're communists. We believe that there is a better type of society. We believe that that there should be a society where, like Cuba, right, or even to some extent China. If you want, let's take an example of one of the most incredible things that China has done. China has, because it has not supply and demand, but it has socialized planning in the government. And yes, we can argue and we can discuss, well, yes, they do have some private industry. They've opened up a whole zone, a whole sector to private industry, but the government is still operates with socialist planning. So they were able to very effectively counter and respond quickly to COVID with few deaths compared to the United States, because they were able to order whole cities shut down. But at the same time, when they shut them down, they were also able to mobilize the People's Army to deliver food to people's houses. They were able to deliver services to people's houses during the pandemic. And that's not supply and demand. That's not capitalist economics that created the situation where they were able to, now they're able to open up at a rate that the U.S. can only look at. And, if you're like Trump and you say, oh, look, COVID is not bad. I got it and I'm over it. So we should just keep moving. He of course, not paying any lip service even to the fact that over 225,000 people have died in the United States. But it's only been, and Cuba too has also successfully fought off the pandemic, has fought off COVID-19. Venezuela has, and that's because they do not have a capitalist economic system. They have a socialist economic system, and that system is focused not on profit, but on people's needs. So no, I'm not for supply and demand. I am for a communist system, and of course that's so far in the future, but a socialist system that operates according to what people need.
All right,
And
next.
ensures that under that system, that everyone has all of the rights that are denied under capitalism, like the right to a job, like the right to a house, like the right to live free and clear of discrimination, of xenophobia, of homophobia, transphobia, racism, all of these things. That there's no guarantee of that under capitalism.
All right, next question we have is from Sushi. He asks, what are your thoughts on syndicalism? And for those who aren't well versed in it, could you briefly describe what it is?
You mean like anarcho-syndicalism? You mean small groups? I mean, you have to define. You'll have to define that because it's a very broad term.
I am not familiar with these terms.
We are. I mean, we are not. I mean, if you're talking about, throughout labor history, there have been instances where people sort of did individual acts, and I don't know if you're calling that syndicalism. So you'd have to be very specific. You can't just say, what do you think of syndicalism? So, and we have historically supported, we do not, we've called for unity with a lot of the anarchists. And we think there's a whole sector of the anarchist community that is pro-socialist and pro-communist. And we would definitely like to work with people who we can find sort of we can, if we have some agreement. Individual acts of violence or depends. It really, really depends. I don't know what, anyway, I mean, what we believe is that it's the capitalist system that's violent. The capitalist system right now, what are they talking about in Philadelphia? They're saying, oh yeah, they're so violent and they're looting and they're doing all these things. Whatever is being done in Philadelphia is a result of 400 years of oppression and racism. That is not looting. If anything, where are the reparations? This is sort of retribution for centuries of oppression and genocide. The violent ones are not the people inside the prisons. I mean, we believe in the abolition, and we call for the abolition of the police and the abolition of the prisons, the abolition of borders, the abolition of ICE, the criminals, the real criminals, and I hate that word because I've been a prisoner's rights advocate almost my entire life. But the ones who have committed the crimes are in the government. They're the heads of corporations. They're the ones that I worry about.
All right. Next question we have here. What are your thoughts on social democracy?
Again, nationally, when we can, we work with DSA. Here locally, I've been working with some of this, DSA, it's a very broad, social democracy is a very broad category. We are Leninists, and that's sort of what differentiates us from social democrats. They're not for a party. They're generally, it's sort of like Bernie Sanders. So we certainly will unite. And I think if anything right now, the social democratic forces have popularized the issue of socialism in this country. And we want to thank you for that. We definitely thank people for doing that. But we believe that we cannot reform capitalism. We believe we have to abolish capitalism, that we have to smash it totally, and build a socialist government, establish a socialist government. So that's where we differ. Some social democrats might be really for socialism. Some of them may be, well, let's just sort of change some things and that type of thing. So right now, wherever we can unify, I think it's really important. But I will always push them to go further.
So, what do you really mean when you say abolish capitalism? I think most workers, they don't know what we're tossing around for terms usually. What does that mean? Does that mean that okay, no more corporations? Does that mean no more private property?
What it means is that the means of production. Right now, the means of production, meaning all the factories, the big businesses, Tesla, what's left of the factories, but all of the conglomerates, they're owned by just a handful of people. We want to take all that, we want to expropriate that wealth and put it in the hands of the working class. That's what socialism is. So that then these companies are run by they're run by some sort of group of workers, a workers' assembly. You don't have to join a union because there's just a union. It's not taking people's personal private property. If anything, socialism, abolishing capitalism means abolishing homelessness and houselessness, and abolishing evictions, abolishing joblessness, making sure everyone has a job, making sure everyone has a place to live. So what it's doing is, where private property comes in, it's the private property of the billionaires. And that's why they spend so much effort and energy trying to poison people from believing that they actually can have a better society, that they actually can have something better. They spend so much time saying, oh, things are better now. We have a couple more thousand jobs. Never mind the fact that I forget how many millions of jobs will not even ever come back due to not just the pandemic. It was the COVID crisis and the economic crisis that was already here. And COVID sort of, lit a fire under the economic crisis and made it worse. But I'll tell you, under socialism, people would not be starving. And the number of people, I was just watching, I think it was Democracy Now! This morning about all of the food banks. And the food banks right now, 3 times as many people are coming because people don't have food. In this country, the richest country in the world, this would not happen if the means of production, if the government was in the hands of a socialist system.
So a lot of people, hearing what you just said about abolishing capitalism, their kind of gut instinct or knee-jerk response would be to say that you're advocating theft. What do you say to people that make that point or argument?
Capitalism is theft. In fact, capitalism was built on the theft of Native American land, was built on the theft of enslaved African labor. It was built on the theft of migrants from Mexico and China and all over the world and the Philippines. The fact that we live in the type of country with all of the advantages that we have in this country is a result of U.S. imperialist theft and robbery of African countries, of countries in Latin America, of countries in the Middle East. So let's talk about that. When you want to talk about theft, capitalism is the biggest robber of them all. And the history of imperialism, which came out of capitalism, is the history of one of the most repugnant rape, murder, theft, genocide against people around the world. Theft? No. What we're talking about is a redistribution of the wealth. Why should the wealth of these robber barons, of these Fortune 500, of these billionaires be in the hands of less than 1% of the population? This is really literally blood money that needs to be returned to the people, that needs to be redistributed, that needs to be put into a system that will benefit everyone. I mean, it's an equity issue, right?
Hmm. So where would this leave? I think the term is the petty bourgeoisie, the people that are business owners, but they're not your top hat and monocle types. They're like small mom and pop shops that own like a small rural grocery store or a convenience store.
Well, I mean, I think that it depends on, it really actually depends on where they decide to be in this equation. Because first of all, I'm not sitting back and making all the decisions. In order for a revolution, you need a revolutionary period, you need a revolutionary movement, you need a lot of people in motion, and you need also a very strong group of people who are trying to figure this all out. But there will be a transition period. I mean, I think that these small businesses will still be able to function. But I think, unfortunately, in a lot of revolutionary situations, sometimes these small businesses take the wrong side. So it just depends on where they side when it comes to the revolutionary struggle. In Venezuela, it was a lot of these small businesses that helped the reactionary forces sort of fabricate a food shortage. So in Venezuela, it was very serious because they sided with the US and they sided with the regime change people because they were so worried about losing their quote unquote private property. But there's a lot of community, in this country, there's a lot of community businesses that are embedded in the community who hopefully will do the right thing.
All right. The next question we have here, let's see, is from Lil Bill. Lil Bill asks, how can you say China prevented many COVID deaths when they stopped reporting deaths in mid-January?
China actually, to the world, as far as I know, to the World Health Organization has the figures from China, number one. Number two, people have been following the Chinese press. And what I do know is that, when COVID was first discovered in Wuhan province, the Chinese government immediately closed the province to any travel, had people stay home, and also tested everybody so that they could get an idea of where the virus was and how they could begin to move beyond it. In this country, what happened when people tested? People said, oh, this is nothing. It's just the flu. They ignored it. And then they said, oh, no, there are no tests. And we don't even have any masks. I mean, China redeployed whole factories to make masks, to make ventilators, to make PPE and hand sanitizer. And they were able to export some of this around the world, whereas the US was like falling all over itself because the difference between socialized planning and capitalist planning is just that. I mean, Trump wouldn't even do what they did during World War II, which was to retool factories for what they needed. He didn't want to do that because he's such a believer in, in not interfering with private property and business in this country. But most recently, there was another outbreak in Beijing, and they did the exact same thing. Within days, they had tested 11 million people. And I keep thinking about what New York City went through I have two nieces in New York City who are healthcare workers, and they would tell me these horror stories. They're working in hospitals. One's an emergency room nurse, and the other one is an infectious disease doctor, both in New York City. They couldn't get PPE. People were coming in. People were dying. There was no room in the hospital. I mean, this country, private property, capitalism. I mean, I think actually, honestly and truthfully, I think some of the ruling class was thinking, well, this will take care of some level, this will just, we can afford to lose part of this population. The elderly, the immunocompromised, where people in nursing homes, whereas China responded so quickly. Every life was precious. It's a very different response.
All right, next question we have here is from Ito Ibo. He wants to know, or she, Ito wants to know, do you support
Maybe
the,
they.
Bay is a better word to use here.
Yes.
Ito Bay, if you support the abolition of race.
That's not my job, or that's not, as a white person, and I am white, I cannot make any decisions about abolishing race. That's a question that the oppressed, people who have been oppressed forever, people who have been the victims of racism, that's something for them. And I know among oppressed communities, there are all sorts of differing ideas, and they will have to decide. But I respect and support the many races, and people are very proud of their race. You know, they've taken what was something that was used to enslave them and turned it into something that is a matter of great pride. And I support the right of the oppressed people, and I support the right of all of the races, and of the races of oppressed people.
All right.
The white race is a little bit of a different question.
Next question here is from Lil Bill. Do you support a universal basic income?
I support a guaranteed wage. I don't know what a universal basic, this is more of a transitional demand, that there should be a guaranteed wage so that people are not poor. That there should be, and there should be a guaranteed wage for people who don't have jobs. I mean, right now people are totally freaked out about the fact that their unemployment is running out and the government is not extending unemployment at this point. And unemployment was barely enough to keep their family afloat the way it was. So I believe that working people in this country have the right to live a decent life. They're not working a decent life now. They're being, those who have jobs are the conditions of working with little or no PPE, or working from home and wondering when they're going to be laid off, or people have been laid off and wondering if they'll ever be called back. So I believe that, yes, everyone should have a guarantee to a job or to a living wage if they can't get to their job.
All right, let's see here. User Muskrat wants to know, do you think that being right-wing makes you a bad person?
It's a very broad question. Are you a right winger with a gun pointed at me? And then I'd say, yeah, I think you're pretty bad. Or are you someone who's confused? The left in this country is not that strong and doesn't exist in a lot of different places. And I believe a lot of people flock to Trump, and still somewhat flock to Trump, because they don't see that the other side, that the Democrats have an answer for all of the things that are going on in the world. And I, in a sense, I can see that. I can see it sort of like a vote against the status quo, or a belief in the status quo, or maybe somebody has right-wing beliefs because nobody has challenged them. I don't want to write people off. I actually think that the material conditions will, in other words, what's going on in our lives, what's going on economically and socially and politically will impact a lot of people. It certainly did after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were murdered. So many people who maybe never considered themselves anti-racist or never said had never known what white supremacy was, found themselves in the streets chanting, you know, Black Lives Matter, down with white supremacy, or white supremacy is terrorism. So small events can push people. So I don't think anybody is necessarily I hope, unless they're, you know, part of an organized right-wing party. I don't think people are necessarily frozen. And I do believe that people can change.
Can you remember a time when you were not communist, or when you were not, I guess, left-wing, loosely speaking?
I actually can't. I'm not the person to ask that. I have been active politically since I was very, very young. In fact, when I was 1 month old, my parents took me on a demonstration in New York City to save the Rosenbergs, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who were sort of the opening blow of the McCarthy movement, and were used to drive fear about the Soviet Union and nuclear. You know, here at the time, you know, how many years after, 5 years after the United States dropped 2 nuclear bombs on H-bombs on Japan, and you know, a campaign by the U.S. government to crush the trade unions and to drive the left out of the trade unions and the working class movement was launched. And that was launched by framing Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, and claiming that Julius Rosenberg gave plans for the atom bomb to the Soviet Union. So no, I mean, I don't remember being a month old, and I don't remember being at that demonstration, but both my parents were active and they were communists. And so I grew up in a household that of organizers and protesters. So I cannot remember. I mean, I know when I was in high school, I actually, for a little while, rebelled against all the social activism that my family, my father in particular, was involved in. But I realized that my heart was with the movement for revolutionary change in this country. And I've sort of never veered from that since then.
All right. And
But I will tell you, my story is not typical. A lot of people say, "Oh yeah, I was a right winger, and then this happened, and blah blah blah." But I didn't have that. I didn't have that same experience.
Do you find that your views have changed over time, or have they substantially remained the same?
I think I mean, a lot of my opinions on things have changed, and a lot of my beliefs have deepened. I mean, I was raised as in a pretty solidly anti-racist household, with the belief that as a white person, my job was to very loudly and visibly fight racism and fight the genocide against brown and black people in this country. And so that hasn't changed at all. But I mean, I think that, you know, my understanding of things and so many things are different. So many things are not fundamentally different, but, you know, incrementally different. That I hope that, I mean, I would say, I hope that I'm able to change if there are reasons for me to change.
Our next question comes from Will Bill. Will Bill asks,
Little Bill is on this call a lot. You got a lot of questions. Go ahead.
he does have a lot of questions. And they are, good and respectful. So one that he asks, um, how do you see Marxist-Leninism achieving communism or even socialism when it failed to implement anything aside from state capitalism anywhere it's been tried?
Well, I, I don't agree with Lil Bill. I believe that, it's a very old argument, and I don't necessarily want to get into the whole argument, but I was a supporter of the Soviet Union when it existed, and Workers' World Party was a supporter of the Soviet Union when it existed. And we are, when Russia does the right thing, which they have in many aspects, then we support their actions. When they have supported countries that have stood up to US imperialism and put themselves in that same circle, we've certainly supported them. But it was very difficult for the Soviet Union to exist as the only socialist country in the world. And we believe we call it loosely a socialist country, a country that was a worker state that was moving towards socialism and that had done some incredibly magnificent things in terms of respect for all of the thousands of nationally oppressed minorities in the Soviet Union. So different. I mean, that all of the work that had been done fell apart when the quote unquote wall fell. But we definitely supported the Russian Revolution. I don't think that Lenin ever thought that he really thought that the revolutions would happen in Europe, that Germany and some of the other countries where the working class was very strong and where they had a working class, whereas the Soviet Union or Russia was really a cross between a feudal country and just an emerging capitalist country. He did not envision the Russia being the first country or the only country. And so there were many problems. I mean, when you have a revolution in one country and the imperialists do everything they can on a major scale to prevent you from growing, from getting food. I mean, the embargoes, the armies at the door, the European and US armies at the door of the early Soviet Union, all of that did not, the campaign, all of that did not enable the Soviet Union to really develop to its capacity. The fact that Cuba has been able to, the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union fell, the Soviet Union was the biggest supporter, financial, economic, and political supporter of Cuba. Cuba has managed to maintain its social system today, despite the US blockade. If we really want to see socialism in all of the countries that are moving out of the orbit of US imperialism, we have to fight the revolution in this country. Our job in this country, rather than criticizing other governments around the world or looking back historically and being demoralized by all the garbage that they put out in history books, which I wouldn't accept anyway, that we need to dedicate ourselves to bringing down this lousy, rotten, racist, imperialist, homophobic, transphobic, xenophobic, all the phobics, hateful system. That's our job. And we also have to make sure that, one of the ways that the US has always tried to get out of economic crisis is to fight a war somewhere. They did it with Iraq, they did it with Afghanistan. They did it with Vietnam. These wars are not going to pull the US out of the economic crisis that they're in right now. And we have to be the ones who oppose each and every war. If anything, we want to tell the military, like they did in Vietnam, to turn the guns around. We need to turn it around and we need to bring down the system.
So speaking,
and I don't call the Soviet Union state capitalist, ever.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
No, I said no. I don't agree with Little Bill. No, it was a socialist system.
Okay. So speaking of not harping on um, historical woes, what were your thoughts on the Berlin Wall?
You mean it falling? Or you
Right. I
mean
mean, you
falling?
mentioned,
Well, the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, was part of the progressive socialist worker states that had formed after World War II, and there was a wall between East and West. And if you look at the rights of workers in East and West Germany, the rights of workers in East Germany were far superior because it was, to one degree or another, a socialized state. And they had made some incredible advances in medicine. They had made incredible advances in so many, in education, so many different areas. When that wall was torn down, no, we did not. And we hold the U.S. and the European imperialists responsible, partially responsible, to, as well as the totally counter-revolutionary measures of Gorbachev and the last round of Soviet leaders. They destroyed the socialist, the USSR. And what was the symbol? They tore down the wall. If the wall was torn down, the only way it would have been progressive would have been if all of Europe had gone socialist. Then you could tear down the wall. But all you have to do is look at what incredible things had been happening in parts of the USSR, and now look now. Now they have bandits. They have tyrants running these artificially constructed countries all around what used to be the USSR, and people are living in poverty. I mean, people who had grown up under socialism, who never knew hunger, all of a sudden knew hunger, knew joblessness, all of these things, lack of health care, because the millionaires took over. That's what they wanted. That's who wanted to destroy the Soviet Union. It wasn't the people inside. It was the millionaires, the international millionaires. And they had their way. It's tragedy. It's set back the world movement tremendously.
So, going forward, what do you think is the biggest obstacle or roadblock to achieving socialism?
One, only one. um, Imperialism, capitalism. It's Workers' World publishes a newspaper. We had, before COVID, published a physical weekly paper. And when COVID hit, we went to an online edition. And we're sort of in between online, and we just printed our our first edition, actually, 8-pager. But it's sort of at this point going to be a monthly paper. But the major media, the ones that most people read, are the ones that are bought and paid for, and the mouthpieces of big business. Big business does not want socialism. People in this country, probably more than any other country of the world, have been so, and I'm going to use the word brainwashed, by the capitalists and the imperialists into thinking it can never be here. We can never change things. It's always going to be this way. In fact, somehow or another, the only way to get out of it is for people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, the old bootstrap thing, and maybe they can be part of the millionaires. So people have been sort of bombarded with a lot of demoralization, a lot of garbage, and it's really hard to break through that. But I think that's perhaps the biggest obstacle. But the thing, excuse me, one more sip. The thing working in our favor is that capitalism really is in crisis. They're not going to be able to solve things. And I don't think even arming right-wing militias is going to help. Even Trump, if he says, I'm not going to step down, That's not going to help. Even electing Joe Biden, Smiling Joe, that's not going to help either. The fact is that this system has worn itself out. Its usefulness, its ability to deal with the needs of people, or even to pretend to deal with the needs of people, is done. We don't have a choice. We have to work to put pressure, to organize, to eventually, it's not like we wake up and say, oh yeah, tomorrow we're going to go abolish capitalism. But I do believe that the conditions will create a situation where people realize that we have to overthrow the system that we live under and put in one that is going to respond and be based on people's needs and going to be run by the majority of the people in this country who are working and oppressed people.
Next question we've got here. What are your thoughts on...
Can I ask you, are we going a lot beyond an hour?
Sorry?
Are we going a lot? I thought it was like an hour, but
just a couple more, if that's all right with you.
okay.
Okay. So there was a question. What are your thoughts on Rojava?
Rojava.
I think it's the northeastern part of Syria.
Oh, okay. You mean where the Kurds are?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I will say that we support the government of President Assad in their fight to against U.S. imperialism and regime change. We believe that the United States, through the CIA, has been financing the opposition of most of the groups that have been fighting against the Syrian government, including they have also bought off parts of the Kurdish people. There's not unanimity. There are some Kurdish groups that support President Assad, and there are some that unfortunately have been paid off by the CIA at this point, and are busy trying to create an opening for the U.S. and perhaps other imperialist countries to intervene. So we do not support the U.S.-backed groupings in Syria in any way, shape, or form. And we can only hope. I mean, some of the Kurdish groups that we've had relations in the past have unfortunately gone over to accepting money from the CIA. And so we cannot support those. We believe that the question in Syria is a question of self-determination, and it's up to the Syrian people to determine their path, and not up to the U.S. and its backed groups, its finance groups. Because the U.S., its only interest is regime change. I mean, Assad is certainly, he's not a socialist. He's a nationalist, and has historically supported the Palestinians, which is, of course, one reason why at this point the U.S. is so busy trying to manipulate countries in the Middle East into an alliance with Israel. And by the way, we do not support the state of Israel. We support the right of the Palestinian people for their liberation and freedom. So.
All right. So as we close up here, last question. We've talked about a lot of different things, you know, homophobia, imperialism, racism, all those really fun things. But going forward, what makes you most hopeful in the world?
I think to me is what I'm most hopeful about is the amazing rebellions that are happening all over this country against police terror and racism, and also against continued detention of migrant children in the detention centers, the treatment of people in jails and in prisons. There is really a reawakening. in a way, it's, as somebody who went through the 60s and saw people overnight change consciousness and be pushed into the street, I will say that this movement is so much more grounded in the oppressed communities, with the leadership of the oppressed community, with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm extremely, extremely hopeful that this movement will spill into the struggles that are to come, and will be an important part of the struggles that are to come, and that we will be that much closer to finally abolishing capitalism and winning a workers' world.
All
I
right.
do want to say, if people liked anything resonated with you, please go to our website, workers.org. We got it with the workers.org, www. We have articles, we have books, we have classes. If you want to join, there's even a form that you can fill out, and we'll get back to you. So please do check us out. Don't just take my word for it. I think we have some amazing comrades that are writing and that are in the streets. We have people in Philadelphia who are in the streets, almost as we speak, fighting racism. And the most important thing for all of you, I'd love for you to all join Workers' World Party, but the most important thing is that you don't sit back, that you push yourself to be involved. Get involved, find an organization that is fighting against the crimes of this government in whatever shape or form that you believe, and please get involved. We need everyone in the struggle.
All right. www.workers.org, is that right?
www.workers.org. Yes.
All right. Judy, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on.
Sure. Thank you so much. Take care.
You too.